Now, obviously, you can see what's happening here. Stark and people who argue like this, I'm trying to put his point of view fairly since I'm going to reject it. They're saying that this is what's happening, and this is what happened in the 20th century, and especially in the second half of the 20th century. This is, according to Stark, this is the age-old pattern. Evangelicalism is coming back because people want what religion offers. They can't get it from the Protestant mainline, so they're going to the evangelizing sects and the new denominations. And of course, one of the aspects of the Southern Baptist Convention is that in the Southern Baptist churches, one of the things they noticed this going on in the North, and they were determined to avoid it. So one of the things they did very early on was they made it the rule that a congregation cannot have another entity dictating who the minister will be. So, you know, what happens as denominations evolve is that they...
What's that? I'm sorry, could you explain it a little bit more?
As denominations evolve, there's a structure is created for accrediting ministers. So, if you're in a Presbyterian church or an Episcopalian church, especially, or any of the older churches, almost all Christian denominations, an affiliated congregation cannot choose with complete freedom who they will have as minister. There are all kinds of restrictions are placed on them by the bureaucracy which evolves with that denomination. The Southern Baptists don't have that. They were determined to avoid that, and they have avoided it. And of course, I mean, they also avoid it by setting up their own seminaries and so on that accredit ministers, and making it a point that everybody has to sign a declaration that they accept the literal word of the Bible, and things like that. But basically, it's the autonomy of the congregation that was a barrier against this liberalizing force that came from the ministers. Now, Stark and by the way, Stark and somebody else wrote a book called The Churching of America, which is a very vivid description of what happened mainly in the 19th century. Another thing that Stark and his associates did was this was not original research on their part. They made more generally known what was already known to specialized scholars. Specialized scholars in medieval Europe knew that people in medieval Europe were not very religious. Religion was not as deeply rooted in Europe as people think. It was not a universal age of faith. You know, what happened in medieval Europe was that churches were places where a priest would have his back to anybody else who was in the church. And if you look at these churches, you see that they could not possibly accommodate the entire population that lived in the village. They were small. The priest did the rites, and it was supposed to be Latin, but most priests actually didn't know Latin, so they just mumbled nonsense. There were no seminaries. A priest was like any other craftsman. He became apprenticed to another priest and learned the tricks of the trade. This mumbling of nonsense was not speaking in tongues. It was meant to be Latin, but the peasants didn't know any difference. The idea that the idea that all the people in the village would be participants was something totally alien to the medieval Christian organization. That basically it's more like the witch doctor has to perform the rites, otherwise the crops won't grow, the sun won't come up in the morning. That was the attitude the peasants had. This is all very impressive stuff. The priest has got to do it, and the peasants would constantly go to holy men, asking them to bless this and do that in exchange for payment, of course. And that was medieval Christianity. So it wasn't a great age of faith. So this has been known all along to medieval historians, but this became more disseminated to a wider audience by people like Stark and his co-thinkers. So, what do we have here? We have a picture of that rejects secularization. That religion will always be with us. It will always be it will appear on the surface to wax and wane. But this is just superficial. Really, religion's always there. Somebody's going to supply it, and the idea that our modern societies are going to gradually become less religious is just an illusion.